Welcome to the Avro Heritage Museum podcast, supported by Museum Development North and Arts Council England.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for the fourth and final part of our conversation with Les Willans. In this episode, Les reflects on what really motivated him through his long career. You might be surprised to hear that his passion for aircraft didn't play a particularly big part in that. We're going to hear how, perhaps without even realising it, Les was an inspirational leader and a valued mentor for so many colleagues who worked in his teams. He talks about the people in the industry whom he admired, and he outlines how working in the aviation industry brought a particular set of challenges and requirements that he would never have encountered elsewhere. But that unique work environment also brought him amazing experiences and opportunities. To start us off on this episode, I asked Les to tell us how, after the closure of Woodford, retirement initially worked out for him.
I thought, I've got plenty of time to go and ride my bike, go around the countryside and ride my bike about. And I just got stuck into daily life. I thought, I'll go to the gym and keep myself occupied, things around the house, a bit of modelling and stuff like that in the house. And then one day, I think it was a bank holiday, I said to the wife, come on, we'll go to this museum. I think it was about 2015 or thereabouts, 2016, something like that. It hadn't been open very long. And then some of the people I knew, I walked around and had a look at what was going on, reflected on, I worked on that and I did some of this. And then one of them said, why don't you come and volunteer here? Why? Well, you've got a different outlook on things. You've obviously done a lot of the things that I haven't done. I thought, well, all right, I'll think about it. And so I thought about it and I did. And that's, I've been here ever since. I do cockpit tours, That's mainly on the Lancaster, but I've done others as well. But I sometimes go off at a tangent when I'm talking to the visitors. I go, my past career gets in the way of me and I start telling them technical things when I shouldn't really. And I, we might use my experience as why things have happened in different aircraft and why they do things in the aircraft. And strangely enough, I do say that I'm not that interested in aeroplanes, which seems a bit strange to say. To me, it was always a job. It wasn't because it was a hobby. A lot of people used to join the company because that was their hobby. That was aircraft, spotting aircraft and things and all things to do with aircraft. And that wasn't my thing.
But I sense, Les, in chatting to you, that what you enjoyed was the challenge of a problem.
Yes, always is. Yep, I do, yeah. I do say that to some of the young children sometimes. I say, what do you want to do when you grow up and get a job and don't know? The father doesn't know what they want to do. I said, well, I'll tell you one thing. I said, if you go into engineering, I said, you'll never be able to work. I said, I was never able to work all my whole life. It doesn't matter what industry you go in. If you're in engineering or an engineer, all you're doing is fixing a problem for somebody. You'll always be valuable to somebody in an engineering job, and they always want somebody to do an engineering job to fix things.
And just starting that process of reflecting back, is there a single challenge in terms of design engineer task that was perhaps the most difficult?
There probably was if I go back prior to my aviation career, if you like. When I was at Ferrantes, we were producing printed circuit boards, and you were given a basic wiring diagram by an engineer probably on the back of an A4 piece of paper of what you needed to do. There were integrated circuits and transistors and diodes and resistors and all these sort of things that went on. And you had a big piece of graph paper on your drawing board, and you had to draw this diagram, if you like, in real life. And I thought, well, this is a mechanical problem. This is a technical problem I've got to solve because I've never done this before in my life. And I'm not an electrical engineer by any stretch of the imagination. And I thought, well, how do I do this? And somebody said, well, you've got two sides. You've got, a front and a back, and you've got to be able to connect the front and the back. And you have to do it by drilling a hole through the circuit board and providing a connection between the circuit on one side and the other. So by solving that problem, which used to take you about a month really, and all essence, to produce the thing from scratch, to get it approved, and then you had to produce a version of that on a piece of film with a piece of tape, black tape. So you create the outline of a circuit diagram of printed circuit layout with something called chart pack, which is sticky tape, and then that is photographed and shrunk in size down to full size. That was my first big challenge, really, to undertake something that I never have done before. And it sounds simple, but to me, it was strange and had a bit of a wobble somewhere in between now, because the chief draftsman was a bit of a stickler. And he just said to me, go for a walk around the shop. Go for a walk outside, just clear your head and come back and take a deep breath. And that's what I did. Probably another thing that I did was they used to send us on these training courses, bonding things, between personnel, different grades of people. And we were sent on one to a place in Ross-on-Wye, and this so happened it was one start of the first Gulf War, and we were doing mock interviews with people pretending to be somebody else. And this is where my bugbear came into play. I was speaking to a chief stressman, and I was pretending to be an apprentice, and I was role playing. I said, "I'll tell you what," I said, "you've given me this handbook to read," and I said, "I'm sick of it." And after this role play, he said to me, he said, "I hadn't realised the impact it has on somebody by giving them a handbook to read, and that is what I do." He said, "You've made me think now. I'm thankful for that." But as part of this process, doing this thing, they're given as a little practical exercise to undertake. They split us into separate teams, and we were given component parts by people who went to find all these pieces over in the countryside. They were driven around by somebody who was a taxi driver, inverted commas. They were given instructions to find these with coordinates and a map, if you like, and bring them back to the hotel. And we were given the task of building a small Mammoth steam engine. And we had a photograph of it, and we had a cross-sectional view of the components, how it all supposedly went together. And I was managing this team of people to be able to assemble this Mammoth steam engine to get it to work at the end of the day. We were being not supervised, but the people who were running this teamwork exercise come from Hatfield. This young lady came round behind us and said, "What are you doing?" I explained what we're doing. She said, "How are you achieving all this, putting all these bits and pieces together?" I said, "Well, I'm telling them how to put it together." "Why?" I said, "Because I'm an engineer." She looked at me quizzically. "This is my job. This is what I do. I find all these bits. I look at the component parts, look at the picture, look at the photograph, and I've got all the information. I can imagine what it all looks like in my head and how it fits together, and I can tell them people how to put it all together so that when we fully assemble all this engine and put some water in the boiler and set fire to the material underneath the boiler, we're going to produce some steam and it's going to turn the engine round." And we got that far of flicking the flywheel round and the engine running. And then at the end of the day, she came round to me. She said, "You're the only team that's ever got this far." It does, really. I mean, apart from, I suppose it's partly my management skill at the time, and the fact that I was leading people who didn't know what they were doing to some extent. They might have been in engineering, but they didn't have an engineering background as such. Somebody might have worked in a buying department, or they might have worked in sales, but they worked in the company. And so just listening to the instruction, they said, "Yes, I can turn a screw. I can do that. I can put that together. Yes, I can do that." And so that's the thing you ask them. "Can you do this? If I tell you how to do it, can you just follow my instructions?" "Yes, I can." And that's the basis of being a manager and being an engineer and being a bit of a teacher, I suppose, isn't it?
Is there any period like over those 31 years that if you had the chance, you'd like to go back to? I'm guessing it's not the last 11 months, as you described.
I think my apprentice training was quite an eventful thing, really, because I quickly realised that I was good at doing what I was doing, because I was also able to help other people who were doing these test pieces how to get through their struggles. I'd used my basic woodworking skills to metalwork, because I'd never done metalwork properly before. And they couldn't understand how I was getting all these test pieces to fit together properly, using a scriber and a hacksaw and a file. And also, the people you meet in the apprentice training school are widely different in their outlooks and backgrounds and skill levels. And there was a young lad who was just an apprentice, a craft apprentice, not a technician apprentice. His name was Les too, but we called him Goliath because he was so small, and he fitted under my armpits. But we got on together well because he was with the same name, and he looked up to me in a different way because I helped him out.
What a sense, Les, is that you were a very good mentor and teacher.
Well, I hope so. I don't realise it was someone I've done it. No.
Is there anybody looking back that you can think of that when you were younger that was a great inspiration or a great mentor in those 31 years?
There were quite a few people. Yeah, one of my the chap who told me I was better than I thought I was. I always looked up to him because he was a graduate apprentice and he went to university, and we used to mock him because of the clothes he wore. He used to wear sandals a lot and turned up jeans, but he was very clever and very bright, very knowledgeable, and he could give you ideas, and he could challenge his ideas and he wouldn't say no. Those sort of people, and those are people that you can look up to. It's the people who you suggest ideas to who say, without thinking about it, no, you do it my way. I can't abide those people because they're not open-minded enough. I'll admit if I'm wrong. You've got to fix problems as a team. You can't fix it all on your own. It's obvious when you come to places like this, you can't fall out with people. And I used to adopt a philosophy of my own when I was working. I'd used to go and see the stress engineers. I'd stand at his desk and people would say, why don't you ring him up? I said, he can not answer the phone, can't he? I said, if I stand at his desk, he can't avoid me anymore. But I used to engage them in conversation before I asked them a question. I'll ask him what the time of day was, or what do you think of the weather, and how are you getting on? Oh, by the way, can you just ask him this question? I'd like you to sign this for me, please. I've got him on my side then. Yeah, that's part of psychology, isn't it?
You brought out the complexities of being a design engineer in aviation industry. Different departments,
Yeah, there are.
Communications are so important.
There are.
Was that, do you think, more accentuated in the aviation industry than it would have been if you'd have stayed with Ferranti?
No, it's a feature of the aerospace industry, yeah. Because you're so regulated, you need all these specialist departments. You even have a crash investigation department, and he's an interesting person to talk to, why so he's sent out on behalf of the company. So each company has a crash investigator in essence. So you have, if you go through each individual bit of an airplane has a different function. You have an aerodynamicist. If you start at the bottom, you have a designer, and you have design engineers, and you have engineers, and you have stress engineers. You have an aerodynamicist. You have a specialist engineers, which are functions on the system of the airplane. You have electrical specialists, avionics specialists, hydraulic specialists, fuel specialists, mechanical specialists. Then you go into the other bits of the business. You have somebody who buy the bits, somebody who supplies all the bits. There's a chemical lab who look after all the things with material properties. And you've got the shop floor people, customer support.
So people communicating, getting on.
You need to talk to all of these people. You have to talk to all these people. And as I was saying before we started all this, if you don't talk to the people on the shop floor, you're not going to get things done. And you've got to stop yourself being above them. You've got to respect that they've got a difficult job to do. They're not always brought up with understanding how drawings work. They may be able to use a dolly and a rivet gun, but they're not always be able to understand how a drawing works. The things that the draftsman produces. Is he producing the right information for the person doing the job, be able to carry out the job properly and efficiently, and without talking to the guy on the other end saying, have I given you enough information to complete this job? Do you need me to put dimensions on where to put a hole in the part, or do I need to give you a general description of how to put the holes in the part, like drill and assembly? No, just tell us how to drill and fit on assembly. Don't tell us how far to pull it, and don't give us the dimensions. We'll use our experience of fitting to put it in the right place. Right, that's all I need to know. We don't want to be too elaborate and teach him to suck eggs. So there's a degree in which I think when you start off in life like that, you don't understand the process further along. What you're producing is used, how they use it. Are you giving enough information? Are you not giving enough information? Which is where all the queries come from. You've not given somebody enough information. You've missed a dimension off a drawing. You've not told them the right size of the hole. Simple things like that. Put the wrong rivet hole size. So there's all that sort of information that's up there that in some businesses you don't do. Well, a lot of the businesses don't do. Probably things that are made as repeats, like cars, have a process similar, probably in a roundabout way. But they all got to follow a process through design, production, manufacture.
Les, we appreciate you doing a lot of preparation for this. Thank you for that. Really enjoyed listening. I really have. And I want to finish off by saying you've got an enormous amount to be proud of. There's absolutely no question about that. And my intuition is that if you could do it all over again, you probably would.
I think I would, yeah. I've probably had 30 years of, I've met my wife. I've had to help people in their jobs. I've seen people move on, people retire, reorganisations, the better or the worse, meeting lots of other different people in different realms of the business outside and in other site, making friends in other places, which I never would have done. I'd have been stuck in a different business because you're stuck to one office. You haven't got the opportunities to go to these places. I wouldn't have gone to Prestwick and been on design engineering courses. How to build an aeroplane was another course we went on, starting with an American that tells you how you just start off in the first principles in the skunk works. Meeting somebody like that was quite an eye-opener.
Amazing set of experiences. Les, thank you.
You're welcome.
And that's where we say goodbye to Les. It's been a fascinating account that I hope you've enjoyed listening to, as I certainly have. When you heard his first story about doing a practical assessment right back in the days when he applied to be an apprentice, you knew there was somebody here with enormous ingenuity and creativity that would serve him through a long and successful career. His passion for problem solving shines through. And I think we would easily find many people who will have benefited from Les's wisdom, leadership and mentorship in ways that helped set them on their particular career path. In his quiet, unassuming way, he must have provided a lot of inspiration to many people coming up through the industry, as well, of course, of contributing so much to the design of so many aircraft that came off the production lines. I hope he takes real pride in that. Thank you for listening today. And remember, if you think that you or someone you know could contribute to the telling of the Avro Heritage story in a podcast, then please get in touch with us on podcasts@avroheritagemuseum.co.uk. That's podcasts@avroheritagemuseum.co.uk. That's all for now. So until the next time, it's goodbye from me, Chris Bessett.
Make sure you follow us in your podcast app to ensure that you don't miss out on future episodes.